Microsoft gives away a lot of resources for free. The problem is that not everyone knows about everything they offer. In this video, I'm going to show off 10 free tools that are especially helpful for developers. At the end, we'll look at some bonus features that might apply to you as well. Hi, my name is Tim Corey, and it is my goal to make learning software development easier. If that sounds like something that would interest you, hit the subscribe button. And also, join my mailing list by clicking the link in the description. Also down in that description, you will see links to all the tools. Note that some items have the same URL. All right, let's jump into tool number 1. And right off the bat, again, this is for developers, so we're going to go with the Visual Studio IDE, also known as Visual Studio 2017 Community Edition. All right, if you go to visualstudio.com, and again, the link is down in the description, you'll see that there's these 4 buttons here. And in fact, if you hover over the first button, you'll see Community 2017. This is the one you want. This is free. And in fact, it's not a time delay thing. It's not a 90-day free trial. This is free forever. There are some restrictions on it, but essentially, as long as you are a small business that it has less than $1 million in revenue a year, or if you're an individual, either of those cases, you can use Visual Studio 2017 Community Edition for free. So that's by far the number one recommendation I have. Just click here and download. You can find out more information about the IDE by clicking more information. You can see here that it lists all the different things you can do. But then up here at the top, you'll also see under, I believe it's offerings, compare offerings. You'll notice the differences between the 3 editions. If you've watched my C# videos, you'll see that I use, and I sometimes mention it, Visual Studio Enterprise Edition. I'm recommending you get Community Edition. You get Community for free. Now, I get Enterprise for free, and I'll talk about that a little later. But for everybody else, Community Edition is free for pretty much everybody, unless your company has to pay for it because of their size. So the differences aren't really huge. Now, there's some missing bubbles here you'll see. We can expand out to find out what. First of all, this one right here says, well, Community Edition is not for the enterprise. And that just means for large organizations. Organizations that earn more than $1 million in revenue and have more than 5 users of Visual Studio. So under the Integrated Development Environment, the IDE, it's missing a few things here. The biggest one that I see that'd be kind of nice to have is Code Lens. And we'll probably cover that in a future video, but that allows you to get a little more quick view into your code. But that's not the end of the world. So that's the biggest thing I see there. Under advanced debugging, you don't get IntelliTrace or code map or the memory dump analysis, which again, those are nice things to have. They're not absolutely necessary. In fact, you probably won't use those until you get to an advanced usage of Visual Studio. And at that point, yes, you should probably move on to Enterprise. When people are asking about, community versus professional versus enterprise, if you can use community, use it, because I recommend you go from community right to enterprise. All right, testing tools. This is the big area where there's a lot missing in community versus enterprise. And notice it's the same amount missing as professional. The biggest one that I see that we're really missing here is this first one right here, live unit testing. That's a really handy feature where unit tests just run automatically whenever I make changes to my code. So if I were to change my code in a specific method, and that method was being tested in my unit test software, as soon as I make that change, and I believe it's when I hit the debug or the compile button, that it actually triggers that live unit testing to test just that method. So there's some nice stuff there. This extra stuff right here, the test manager is kind of nice. But for the most part, that's the biggest one I see, the live unit testing. That'd be nice to have in the Community Edition. And cross-platform, you're missing some Xamarin stuff, the inspector and the profiler. That does not mean you're missing Xamarin. Notice down here, Xamarin Forms, Xamarin Instant Player, native iOS and Android UI Designer, and shared code between Android and iOS with Xamarin. So you are getting all those. It's just that you're not getting some extra stuff with Xamarin unless you have the Enterprise Edition. So with that being said, there's a few things missing, but those are like peripheral things. They're definitely not the build code, build applications, build websites. All that kind of stuff is baked into Community Edition. Community Edition is a full-featured IDE. It's not the top of the line, but it's not the basic stripped-down model either. It's a pretty full-featured IDE. There's very, very few things that you're missing. And those are more nice-to-haves versus have-to-haves. I don't think there's anything you have to have in Enterprise. They're just niceties. Everything you need is in Community Edition. So that is what I'd recommend right out of the gate. If you're on Windows, download Visual Studio for Windows. Now, I do say for Windows, and that's Community Edition, don't forget. But I do say for Windows because it's actually number 2 on my list. It's separate. I call it a different thing, and that's Visual Studio for Mac. This is a little bit confusing because they put it under the same title. Notice the Visual Studio IDE. If I was on a Mac right now, it would say Download for Mac. But under the Learn More, if I go to Mac, it shows me more about the Mac version. The thing I want to highlight is it's fully featured, that's great, for Android, iOS, macOS, web, and cloud development. Notice what it's missing. Windows Desktop. Which kind of makes sense. You're on a Mac. How are you going to develop for a Windows Desktop? But what that means is anything that you're familiar with in the Visual Studio IDE that uses the .NET framework, the full .NET framework, can't be done in Visual Studio for Mac. It doesn't have that full framework because that full framework depends on a lot of stuff in Windows. So a lot of the C# code you're used to writing, you can't write in the Mac version of Visual Studio because you're compiling EXEs and DLLs, neither of which will run on a Mac machine. So it couldn't even debug it. Now, you can write C#. Let's be clear here. You can write C# in the Mac version. Because don't forget that C# has .NET Core stuff. Well, .NET Core works on any platform. Let me back up. Not quite any platform, but .NET Core does work on the Mac platform. There's the .NET Standard will work on any platform because it goes across .NET Core and it goes across the Xamarin platform and some other things. But .NET Core will run on Mac and Linux. So there is a difference, and that's why this is actually number 2 here, which is Visual Studio for Mac. Not something I'm really familiar with just because I don't use a Mac in any of my development, but if you're on a Mac, obviously you can't install the Windows version of Visual Studio, but you can get this version, Community as well, for Mac. And you can find all the nice features they have there. There's a lot of great stuff here. It's just not the same thing. So I'll make sure I clarified that there is a difference, but they are both great products. They're just different. All right, let's go back to visualstudio.com and look at the next thing. I'm actually going to skip over one and come back to it. And that is right here, this third button here. I can't really highlight because it's actually a link, but Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code is different than the Visual Studio IDE, the first one. Visual Studio Code still has versions for Windows, Linux, and Mac. Let's go to Learn More. Think of Visual Studio Code primarily as a web editor. It will do web great. And it does it on any platform. So notice Windows, Mac, and Linux, and there's a different installer versions. There's also Stable and Insider if you want to get the cutting edge versus I'd recommend Stable, which is stable. So you can get it for any platform, and it's really good at being a web editor. So if you want, and it's free. Again, these are all free tools. So if you want a great web editor that works on your Linux box or on your Windows box even, Visual Studio Code is a great option. It's designed for the web. It's designed with a lot of those tools in mind. It's integrated with Git and a couple of other things. So you can learn more about that down here. It has IntelliSense and all the rest. Again, free. So really nice little featured app. It's really growing in popularity. Personally, for web development, I use WebStorm, but from what I'm hearing, this is a real run for its money. I pay for WebStorm. WebStorm is not free, but this is becoming the equal to WebStorm in a lot of ways. And so that's something that I'll probably be taking a peek at again down the road a little bit and see, well, maybe I can replace WebStorm with this. So that's number 3 is Visual Studio Code. Again, different than Visual Studio Community Edition, IDE, because this is just for the web. And that's number 3 in this 4 section list. So we have Visual Studio for Windows. We have Visual Studio for Mac. We have Visual Studio Code, which installs on Windows, Mac, or Linux. The next one on this page, the number 2 item, is actually not a installable tool, but instead it's Visual Studio Team Services. Now, don't get confused here. You may think, well, I'm not on a team. It's just me in solo development. This is still for you. You may think, well, we've got 4 people in the office. How much is it going to cost? It's free for you. So this is up to 5 users for free. And it follows a lot of the same rules as the Visual Studio IDE. So if you have, again, I believe it's less than $1 million in revenue, you should be good. Let's see if it has. I don't see the listing down here, but I believe that's what it is less than $1 million in revenue. You're good to go to use this for free. So this is the details page on this. And what this is it's an all-in-one support system for your code. So right off the bat, you notice on this page right here, we have this image of what it looks like. Now, of course, they've got the more full-featured, we're doing a lot of stuff here on this page dashboard up because it looks cool. My dashboards never look like this. They're never quite this complicated because for my development personally, I just have myself. And so my dashboard is just me. So it's not tons of users. I'm not submitting tons of bugs and having burned down charts and all the rest. But it's still useful for me. When I work for a company, my main job, we have only a few developers. We have 3 right now. And so we can still use this. And it's a little more complicated than my personal one, but it's kind of the same thing. So what this does is this is a dashboard, and that's just kind of the overview of what's going on. But then we have the code section. If you can see my cursor up here on this image, there's the code section. The code section, what it does is it's a full-featured Git client. And so you can, if you're not familiar with Git, I have a video on my YouTube channel. I believe it's called Introduction to Git, GIT. And what that is a way of versioning your code. It's a really powerful tool that if you don't understand it already, you need to learn it. It's one of those, if you want a job in the software development industry, you really need to know Git. It's the number 1 source control system used by developers. And even if you don't use it at the company you're going to go to, it will give you a good idea of how source control works so that when you go to use their source control, you at least have some fundamentals down. They'll be different, but you have the fundamentals down. So that's where your code lives, is in that tab. And it has, all the commit history, and you can do comparisons. You can actually even modify your code on the web. You can modify your code and check that code in or commit that code. So that's all right there. Then there's the work tab, which allows you to do things like have bug reports and have, feature requests and start putting those towards commits. The really cool one is the build and release tab, and they've worked a lot on that recently. The build and release allows you to have a build system in the cloud, again, for free, that will take your code, compile it, bring any packages that need to, modify it in any way you need it to do, and then publish that compiled, built code wherever you want it to go. I use this personally. I use this in my business. I recommend my customers use this. It's amazing for doing builds. And at first, when I thought about that, I'm like, when I first started out, I'm like, why would I ever need a build service? Because I just hit build on Visual Studio and I'm done. There's a lot more to it that you can get into. But even if you have the very simplistic version, it does it for you. So right now for me, when I commit my code to Git in a certain branch, it takes that, it builds it, and it puts it onto whatever servers I need it to be on. So that's really powerful. Tests, if you have unit tests, it can test them during the build process. And they can say, okay, these are failing, therefore the build is going to fail. We're not going to push the new code, and it's going to give me a report. You can also have a wiki page or a series of pages where you describe what happens in your application, how it works. So there's an awful lot of stuff here in the Visual Studio Team Services. This is a whole platform that does a bunch of stuff. Oh, you can even have a private NuGet server. If you're not familiar with NuGet, that's the package management server that Visual Studio uses to bring code snippets or code bits into your project. And you can have a private server. So you can actually publish your own libraries as NuGet packages, which, again, I recommend doing. So these can be private so that no one else in the world can see these things. And yet you can bring them into your packages and your projects on that build server or locally as well. So, and all of this is private. So GitHub offers open source projects, free GitHub repositories. You can create a GitHub repository for free, just like you could on Visual Studio Team Services. The difference is GitHub is only for public unless you pay for the private repositories. Whereas Visual Studio Team Services is private by default. It's much more enterprise friendly and yet also small business friendly in that it's free for us as long as you don't get too big. And once you get too big, we have to pay for it, which makes sense. So really great platform. I recommend that you at least check it out. Like I said, I do it for my personal projects. So even something small, the first thing I do is I create a new repository on Visual Studio Team Services and then commit all my code there and do all of my commits there and my builds. Everything gets done through there. Because once you set it up, it's fire and forget. I just commit my code, and if it's a website project, the website gets updated within about 5 minutes with the compiled, built code that I just committed. So really great stuff. All right, so that's tool number 4. Number 5 is also on visualstudio.com, and that is the Visual Studio App Center. Now, this is not one that I've used personally because I don't really get into building iOS or Android apps using Xamarin. I've used other tools to build Android and iOS apps, but I haven't used Xamarin for it. And so I don't really use this tool. This is actually a newer tool. But the Visual Studio App Center is your one-stop shop for if you're building those kind of tools. So if you're building iOS apps or Android apps or stuff like that, even web apps, you can use this tool kind of like what we're doing in the Visual Studio Team services, where you have the build and the test and the distribute and all that kind of stuff. But they've added a few app-specific things. For example, the crash reports, the analytics, push information, and also down here they actually allow you to test on real devices. So you can actually push your app to different devices and see how it looks and see how it interacts on the different screen sizes. So if you're getting into app development and you're going to use Xamarin, this is the tool for you. So definitely check that out. Like I said, it does Swift, Objective-C, Android, Xamarin iOS, and even React Native. So, and that React Native is for creating apps on the phone. It's not React for web pages. So a whole bunch of good stuff here. This stuff used to be expensive. Okay, when I was getting into app development just for some customers, it was expensive to do stuff like this. And I had to kind of patch some things together because I didn't want to pay all that money when I wasn't going to do it long term. I was just doing it for a customer. And so now the first place I'd probably turn is the Visual Studio App Center and the Xamarin tools, because it's just, there's so much here and it's all free. All right. So enough about that. I'll leave that for you app developers to look at some more, but definitely check that out. Visual Studio App Center. All right. So those are the 5 on this page right here. So it's 4 buttons. This Visual Studio IDE has Windows, but underneath it also has for Mac. So check out those 5. Obviously not everything applies to everybody, but I would recommend everybody get at least one IDE, either the actual IDE or the Visual Studio Code if you're doing just web stuff. But then also get Visual Studio Team services, no matter who you are. Because if you're writing code, you should be putting it into source control. If you're putting it into source control, you should have that source control be somewhere external to your own computer. Even though you can do Git on just your computer, and that's great, and I do that for some projects, the reality is if you have a second place off your computer, then if anything happens to your computer or you could corrupt files, whatever, it's still in a remote repository. So Team service is great for that. It's also great for, like I said, the package management and the build cycle and the testing and all that. So I recommend at least the Visual Studio IDE or Visual Studio Code or both, and this for sure. And if you're into app development, check out the App Center. Okay, so those are the first 5. Now let's move on to SQL Server. So this is, the link is in the description down below, but essentially it's microsoft.com/en-us/sql-server/sql-server-downloads, which is really easy to remember, right? I don't know why they do this. They kind of bury their stuff. I have to Google it every time. Ironic, I know that I'm Googling it. I should probably Bing it, but I have to find it to figure out, where it is. And I know what the names are. So it's not the greatest. But SQL Server is very expensive. SQL Server, even Standard Edition, is very expensive. But for developers, there are 2 options for us that are free forever. Okay? The first option, and the one we're going to look at as number 6, is the Developer Edition. So this is the latest version of SQL Server 2017, Developer Edition. This is free. It's full-featured. It's essentially the same thing as the Enterprise Edition of SQL Server. The differences are very, very minor between the Developer Edition and the Enterprise Edition. And they mainly revolve around just kind of making sure that you follow the rules with Developer Edition. because the rules about Developer Edition are you can't use this as a production server. Now, that doesn't mean you can't create production databases. It just means that you can't install Developer Edition on a server and then point production applications at that Developer Edition. That's a no-no. But put this on your desktop or your laptop and go ahead and create databases. If you want to create a production database, that's fine. It's just that when you actually go to use it in production, you have to make sure you transfer that database to a real production environment. Again, for my day job, I do SQL Server development. And so on my machine, I have SQL Server 2017 Developer Edition. I do all of my development there. But when it comes to deploying that to our production server has, I believe it's Standard Edition. Maybe it's Web Edition. Might be Web Edition. So we deploy it there, and that has a different license, and that's fine. I did all my development on Developer Edition. That's what it's for. But when it actually goes to use it, it's on a licensed production-ready server. So that's just, be careful how you use this thing. But this is amazing. It's full SQL Server. It does everything you ever wanted to do, and it's great for development. So I definitely recommend that you get Developer Edition. Now, the next one I want to point out, and this is number 7 in our list, is the Express Edition, the one over here on the right. Express Edition is also free. The difference is we can use this in production. Now, there are limitations, and we can look at what those limitations are, but I believe they have to do with the size of the database. I believe it has to be 10 gigabytes or less, and not every feature, not all the advanced features are enabled. And so there are some limitations, and they recommend it for desktop apps or small web apps or small server applications. So essentially just think not huge applications that have hundreds of users pounding away at a database at the same time, which makes sense. But probably for everything you're doing in your development environment and everything you're doing for a small business or small client, those type of things, this will work great, and it's free. So you can feel comfortable deploying this. You can feel comfortable using this in a production environment and not have to worry about the licensing issues of it. So those are the two, number 6 and number 7. Developer Edition, put this on your laptop. This is where you do all your work in working on SQL Server. And then Express Edition, this is where you would deploy to if the environment is small or doesn't have a lot of load and you want to have a production-ready app. So those are the two right there. There is kind of a bonus one down here. They're just starting to get SQL Server 2017 on Linux using Docker, and so that's a nice feature. It's just it's the cutting edge right now. But what that'll allow us to do is move off of a Windows Server requirement, which will reduce our licensing costs, which is great. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the idea of the ASP.NET Core. ASP.NET Core can work on Linux and it can work on Docker, and which is great. And people are clamoring, teach me core, teach me core. The problem is a lot of times the number one database we hook up to from a .NET application is SQL Server. Well, if SQL Server is on Windows, why do we have a Linux machine? Yes, we're saving a little bit of licensing costs, but what we're also having problems with is the idea that now we have a Linux machine and a Windows machine in the same environment, and that can cause problems. So a lot of enterprise users, a lot of businesses are saying it's one or the other. So if I have SQL, then I have Windows. And so even though .NET Core is out, they're saying that's great, don't need it because I have Windows. Well, now that SQL Server is going to be on Linux with Docker, that means I don't have to have a Windows environment in order to have my full stack applications from web through API through database. So this is a big deal, and you can read more about that, and that's just kind of a bonus one, but those things are out there. All right, so I've hit you a couple of big ones. Visual Studio IDE is huge. The Visual Studio Team Services is massive, and SQL Server Developer Edition is massive as well. There's another one that's even bigger that I'm going to show you next. And so that's number 8, and that is Azure. If you have not heard about Azure yet, this is Azure, it's called Azure. If you haven't heard about it yet, or maybe you've heard about it, you're not sure what it is or how it works, this is one that you should probably get to know. And that's what Microsoft thinks too. And so they've decided, you know what, we're going to give us away for free for a limited amount. And which I really commend them for, because there's so much here that's so powerful, and they kind of just say, have fun, and which I love. But let's start off with what Azure is. Azure is Microsoft's cloud. And if you're not familiar with what cloud means, or it's kind of nebulous, essentially what cloud is just a whole bunch of servers that run somewhere else. Okay? Yes, there's a little more complexity to it, and yes, they can do other things, but the reality is it's essentially just a whole bunch of computers that run somewhere else that I have access to. It's a fancy name. But for Azure, what they allow us to do is to tap into those computers and do different things. So, for example, I've created whole websites in about 5 minutes on Azure. I just say, give me a website, and here is the URL, and it says, okay, I'm going to build it for you. 5 minutes later, you're good to go. And that's just really convenient. And in fact, I can then hook up my build system with Visual Studio Team Services to connect directly to Azure and push those websites. So it's all kind of integrated. It's great. And in fact, if I want to skip the step of the build server, I can actually, in Visual Studio, hook up my Azure account and say, I've got this ASP.NET MVC application. Build me a website when I compile and push it. It will build a new website on Azure and take your code and put it on that website in about 5 minutes. So, from nothing to an actual test in the cloud running on cloud servers. The really cool thing is, then if I start using that website and I say, man, I'm getting hit hard, twice a year. Let's say for a minute that it's a college registration website. Well, college registration only happens a couple times. Let's just say the fall and the spring. Now, it's probably more time than that, but those are the big ones. So fall semester and spring semester, that's when everyone registers. And so those 2 times, you may have lots of traffic, but then other times you don't. Well, you can actually set, and it's really simple. It's essentially a checkbox. You can set the setting in Azure that says, scale my website as needed. So as more people request your website and it kind of gets pounded on, they'll spin up copies of that website in a clustered environment that'll do the, passing people off to the right server, but pretend they're all the same server, and, distributing that load automatically. And that's one of the best things about Azure, is everything is simple. Now, when you first get into it, you're going to be overwhelmed. It's overwhelming to look at all the options, all the choices, and you may think this is not simple. But as soon as you have an overview of what these different parts do, it'll make a whole lot more sense. And I am going to do some videos on Azure. There's a lot of stuff on Azure coming out in the near future. But for right now, you can go ahead and poke around in Azure and kind of get a feel for what it is and what it does. Now, everything has a cost. So when I say free, just be careful that you understand what I mean by free. By free, I mean they give you $200 in credits for exploring the first 30 days. So for the first 30 days, you get $200 to buy their premium services. And they'll tell you when you start building something, here's how much this is going to cost a month. And so that'll be taken out of the $200. After that month is up, if you have not elected to put a payment method in, and if you've not elected for the pay for overages, then what will happen is your systems will turn off. So if you've purchased premium content and you get past that $200 credit or past the 30 days and you have not put a budget in for your credit card, then what will happen is it'll just turn everything off that's premium and just wait until you have credit again, which is really nice. It's not going to bill you hundreds of dollars accidentally. Just don't turn on the pay-as-you-go option, which is very clear about what that does. So they give you $200 to start, but they also give you 12 months of their popular free services. So 12 months to play around with their popular free services, which they're not free after 12 months. But then you always have certain services for free, 25 of them. All right. So here's the free products, free each month for a year. These are the things that are free. You get a Linux virtual machine and a Windows virtual machine. That's 750 compute hours. And I believe it's per month. So you have to do the math on that. It's not the entire month, I don't believe. But it's pretty close. Maybe it's 1 hour. I think it might be one computer, and that's it. So if you have one Linux machine and one Windows machine, I believe that would be the 750 hours. Not positive. You have to do the math on that. But if you had two Windows machines, that's fine. You just get only half the month before you run out of hours. So that's just something you need to know. Disk storage, you have 64 gig times 2 for managed storage. Blob storage is where you put images or other unstructured data. That's 5 gigabytes. File storage, 5 gigabytes. SQL databases, 250 gigabytes of SQL databases. I use their Azure SQL a lot. It is so simple to spool up an Azure SQL Server, especially compared to actually installing SQL Server. Installing SQL Server can be daunting. I actually have a whole course that starts off with, here's how you install SQL Server, and that's Developer Edition, because it is somewhat complicated. Whereas this, it's a couple of minutes because everything is automated and behind a menu. I don't deal with the actual configuration. Microsoft does. So then they have Cosmos DB, and they have 15 gigabytes of bandwidth transfer or data transfer. But then there's a free anytime products, app services, functions, containers. That'd be for your Docker containers. Service Fabric, Active Directory. So there's a whole bunch of other fun stuff that you can do in Azure for free. So this is all, again, tremendous. It's amazing. And for testing purposes especially, it's easy to spin up a website, test it for a few hours, and then delete it. Again, same as SQL Server or a number of other things. You can actually spool up an entire Windows or Linux machine in the cloud and get RDP access, Remote Desktop Protocol. You can get RDP access into that server in about, it's under 10 minutes. It depends on your connection speed and how busy they are, but it's pretty quick how fast you can get a server up and get into it on a remote desktop. So really powerful stuff. And again, most of the configuration, unless you do a full Windows desktop or a full Linux desktop, most of the configuration is handled by Microsoft. So if I say, give me a SQL Server, an Azure SQL Server, they're going to handle the installation. They're going to handle where the log files go. They're going to handle how to balance things out, how to speed things up and optimize things, all the rest. All that stuff that we used to pay people just to handle. So a SQL Server DBA, a database administrator, their job would be to do what Azure does for you. Now, that's not to say that Azure eliminates the need for a DBA. But what it does mean is that you don't have to learn how to be a DBA when you're doing development. Database developer, sure. But database administrator, not so much. Let Azure do it for you. So, really big fan of Azure. I use it quite a bit. I have free credits I get every month, which again, nice feature. I'll tell you how you can get access to those yourself. But Azure has some great tools in it. It's great to understand how they work because it might be something you can do for a customer or for a work environment as well, where maybe you don't pay for a lot, but you pay for certain services, and it's a financial benefit for you. So check it out, learn it, get to know it, take advantage of the free 12 months of some services, always free 25 plus services, and the $200 in credit for the first 30 days. So that's Azure. Again, I'll have some more videos on that in the future. Number 9 is probably one you're going to groan at, but it's documentation. Now you may say, documentation, it's always horrible. Well, it's not anymore. Okay, docs.microsoft.com. Microsoft realized that MSDN was awful. And so they said, we're going to scrap that idea and we're going to come up with a new system, a new way of doing things. And that's where docs.microsoft.com comes in. This is a much better system for documentation. It's a much more intelligent documentation system, and it even allows for people to contribute their own documentation articles to this site to make it even better. So there's some really powerful stuff in here, but this is much, much more clear than we used to have. Now, it is a growing platform. It's new. And so there's not documentation on everything. But for example, ASP.NET. This is versus Core. That's Core. This is ASP.NET. If you want to look at APIs, you click on API, and there's some really good articles on step-by-step how to do it with pictures. And it's way beyond what MSDN had. If you ever looked at some MSDN documentation, I used to laugh at it because I would look up a function. Maybe the function was called load image file. And I'd say, okay, what does load image file do? And the description would be loads image file. And I'd look at that and go, well, yeah, I got that much. That's why I came here. I want more. But really all it put in there is the name of the function. That's not helpful. So this is not that. This is tutorials that have pictures, that have step-by-step, that even have some downloads to them. The references, the resources at docs.microsoft.com are really tremendous. And best of all, they cover a wide range. So it's not just one little thing. So if you want C# stuff, I see C# stuff in here. If you want .NET stuff, Visual Studio, NuGet, even bot services, SQL, Xamarin. It's a lot of it's in here. Again, it's not everything yet. They're still putting more stuff in here. You'll see a more focused approach on the newer stuff versus the older stuff. but that's a good thing. So just know that if it's in here, it'll be great. It'll be a lot better than what you're used to. So check that out. So that's number 9 is the documentation from Microsoft. And number 10 is the Microsoft Virtual Academy, the MVA. So mva.microsoft.com. And what this is designed for is to help people understand their different platforms. So whether it's mobile app development or Visual Studio or C# or database development, they've got something in here for you in video format. So for example, there is the C# fundamentals for absolute beginners. That course right there has a lot of good stuff in it. Now, is it perfect? No, of course not. Nothing is. My content's not perfect. But there's a lot of good stuff in here you can learn from. If you want to get into JavaScript, there's some JavaScript for absolute beginners. And the nice thing here is a lot of this stuff is stuff that I would teach. And that's something I'm very sensitive towards, is I don't recommend just any training platform. You can go to Udemy, you can go to other sites like that and get training courses on some of the same stuff that I teach. And there's a reason why I teach it. And that's because I haven't found the resources where they teach the way that I think it should be taught. Okay, I have some opinions on that after having developed for 20 plus years professionally. And so I've seen some things I want to make development easier, make learning development easier. And so there's certain ways I want to see it taught to make that easier. But I see a lot of times people drive students right into pitfalls. And that concerns me. And that's why I teach things a little bit differently. Well, in the MVA, for the most part, they don't do that. They don't drive you into those pitfalls. And they teach the way that I would want to see things taught. Maybe not in my style, maybe not in the depth that I do, maybe not showing you all the different parts, but they do teach good content. And so that's why if people ask me, where can I find content that's not on your YouTube channel and that you don't sell? This is where. mva.microsoft.com. I trust that most of the stuff on here is of really high quality. And that's because Microsoft is very selective in what it puts on here and who it promotes. So I definitely recommend that if you're missing content from me, or if you want to hear what I say in a different way, or kind of that second voice to say it just a little bit differently, and maybe it'll click, this is the place to go for that video training. And again, this is mostly video training. They do have learning paths, and they call them certifications, I believe. I'm not positive, or at least completion certificates, but it's not an actual certification. Don't confuse the two. Now, I do advertise. I don't know if you saw it down here. One of these. There you go. They advertise, the exams they do for certification. For the most part, these video courses don't teach to a certification. It's just that they offer certification. Microsoft does on their platform. So that's kind of a misnomer there. They're not directly related to each other. It's just that they both come from Microsoft. Okay, so that's number 10. Now, if you've watched any of my top 10, top 5 videos before, you'll know I never stop at the number I give you. There's always something else I want to show you. In this case, what I call the bonus one, the one that everyone can use and should use, in my opinion, is this one, Microsoft's OneDrive. If you're not familiar with OneDrive, you need to be. Okay, this is the equivalent, and I kind of cringe here, this is the equivalent of Dropbox. So if you're familiar with Dropbox, it's a similar thing. And in fact, it installs the same way. It works pretty much the same way in the foundational stuff. It allows you to put a folder on your computer somewhere, and then everything in that folder gets synchronized to the cloud, backed up, versioned, and you have access to it anywhere. And if you're just using those basics, it's great. So I have all of my important files, like all the files for these videos that I create, and all the stuff that goes around these videos, they all get put into my OneDrive account. And that's normally I start from my desktop. This is where I'm recording, is on my desktop. So if I jump on my laptop and want to tweak a recording or do some editing of a recording, I can get on my laptop, and my laptop synchronizes down those files, and I can work on them. But then if I'm on the road and I want to pull something up in that OneDrive folder somewhere, I can do so on my phone or on the web. Really convenient. This is all free. Now, I want to show you the plans, because again, this is a series about free things Microsoft offers to help developers. But I do want to point out the paid versions for this particular one, because it might be something that could benefit you. So the free version gives you 5 gigabytes of storage in the cloud. That's awesome. 5 gigabytes for free for doing nothing. So just sign up, you get 5 gigabytes, you get the mobile app, the web access, the search, photos. You can synchronize your iPhone or I believe Android. So whenever you take a picture on your phone, it gets uploaded to the cloud automatically. That's really nice. So you get all that for free for 5 gigabytes worth of storage. But if you want to take one step up and pay $2 a month or $24 a year, you can multiply that 5 gigabytes by 10 to get 50 gigabytes of storage space. That's nice. $24 gets you 50 gigabytes of storage space. But, and here's what I do, is one of these two options. Now for me, I use this top option here because I have a whole family. But for you, it might just be the personal, because you only have one account. One account, $70 a year, which seems high, but you get 1 terabyte of storage. That's a lot. But you also get Office, Microsoft Office, the full Office suite. Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, OneNote. You also get Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business and some other things as well. All of that is included in this premium. Plus, you can expire links. So when you share out, you can share a link from your OneDrive. You can actually put an expiration date on that. You can have offline folders. Offline folders are nice. Multi-page scanning and more sharing options. So, but the big things here are you get 1 terabyte of storage, which is a lot, and you get the full Office suite. And that's for a year. Now, like I said, I use this higher one, which is $100, only $30 more, but I get 5 user accounts, each with 1 terabyte, and then 5 accounts worth of Microsoft Office. Oh, and don't forget, I didn't mention it before, but you also get the tablet and phone version of Office as well for either of these two plans. So I'm not trying to sell anything here. I'm not going to get a commission on this. I'm not going to put even an affiliate link. I could technically probably get some extra storage space if I put an affiliate link, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to link right to onedrive.live.com. I'm not getting anything for this. Microsoft not paying me or anything like that. But I wanted to point it out because when I started looking at this, I actually started looking at, well, maybe I should pay for the premium version of Dropbox. And then I started doing a comparison and realized, hey, wait a minute. This is $100 a year, and I get my whole family Office, and I get my whole family 1 terabyte OneDrive accounts. Yes, that's exactly what I want. So that's what I do. I think right now I'm actually only using 4 out of the 5. I have my wife and my 2 boys, each on a 1 terabyte account, and I have a full Office suite for them. So that's definitely something to look into. But again, I'm not trying to sell anything. What I recommend though is the free 5 gigabyte version. It's an amazing, easy to use system. So check that out. Sign up for it. Again, it's free, so just sign up for it and try it out. Get the phone app, see how it works. Pretty simple. Put all your stuff there. You're good to go. Okay, so that's like the bonus one for everybody. But then I want to talk through a couple of different options depending on your circumstances. Option number one is if you are a student. So if you go to imagine.microsoft.com, typically if you're a student in a college or even a high school, your IT staff probably has access to give you a Imagine login. And it used to be called DreamSpark, but I guess they've changed that name. So what this is Microsoft gives you access to certain things, including Azure. So if we go over here to the catalog, they give you Azure for Student Starter. They also give you Parallels Desktop for Mac, the Pro version. It's a 3-month trial, but that allows you to run Windows on your Mac. They give you Community Edition of Visual Studio, which that's great. Everybody has Community Edition. But they also give you some other things, including some access to Pluralsight for training. I believe it's 6 months, something like that. And they give you a few other things as well. So depending on your school, depending on what license they bought from Microsoft, they'll have different levels for you with a whole bunch of software. So a lot of this stuff comes for free anyways because Microsoft is really small business friendly, sole proprietor or hobbyist friendly. And so that's kind of what we get at the same level as what a student would normally get. But students do have some extra stuff in this Imagine account. So that's if you're a student. Check that out with your school's IT department, information technology department. So just talk to whoever's in charge of buying the Microsoft licensing to see if you have access to anything like, they used to call it DreamSpark, but now it's Microsoft Imagine. Now, if you are a small business, especially a small business that's just starting out or that is small, like I said, small in the small business, check out startups.microsoft.com. They have a whole bunch of stuff they give away for free, typically for up to 3 years. When a business is newer in the process, there's some limitations, but usually it's a small team or no team and not a ton of revenue, meaning again it's either $500,000 or $1 million, something like that, or less that you're making. So it's a pretty high number for what I'd call a small business. But they give you Azure credits every month. They give you access to Windows versions and to other things like that. And I believe they'll even give you Visual Studio Professional Edition. They might give you Enterprise. I'm not positive. So there's 2 different areas. There's the getting started area, and there's also the scale your business. So they work with Techstars and Y Combinator and some others to give businesses a leg up. And so they give large grants to certain businesses and other things. So just check out this startups.microsoft.com, and depending on your business, kind of browse through here and figure out what applies to you. Not everything will, but doing so, I think, will definitely benefit your business. So check that out. The final one is kind of what I would encourage you to aspire towards, and that's the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Award. And that's something that I have, and it's for giving back to the community. For people who say, I'm not going to just hold all my knowledge to myself, I'm going to give it away. I'm going to teach those who are below me or help those out who might not know everything I know. And it's not for I've arrived. It's for I want to help out in some way. There's a lot of ways you can help out, whether it's speaking at local meetups or organizing local meetups or it is contributing to open source code, or it's even that, docs.microsoft.com, you contribute to there, that will count towards an MVP. There is not a magic number that you have to do. It's just they look at the community as a whole and see, are you a standout contributor in your area? Now, this is not a payment, and this is not you're supporting Microsoft. This is an award, and what it's for is for Microsoft to say, because you do this, we would like to recognize you, and along with that recognition comes a bunch of software. And so this is where I have access to Azure every month. And in fact, if I needed more access to teach Azure, so if I needed more credits in order to teach some advanced stuff or to do a class or something like that, I could just call up my representative and say, hey, can I have some more this month or this 6 months or this year, whatever, and they will give me, potentially thousands of dollars in extra Azure credits just because I am an MVP. And a lot of other businesses, third-party businesses, also give their software away to MVPs for free. And so I don't recommend that you try to, just get free stuff, but this is a way that you can get some of this extra stuff that's maybe outside your price range, but you do have the opportunity to give away to the community. You do that, and you can be awarded the MVP, and you can get some of that kind of free stuff that'll help you do even more for people. So again, it's not something that you do it for the stuff. You do it because you want to help people. But if you do, there may be some benefits there for you as well. So kind of 3 levels of extra stuff: student, small business, and community leader. So any of those 3 levels will give you extra stuff beyond what we've talked about so far. So that's why they're not, included in the top 10, because it's only based upon certain circumstances in your area. But they're definitely something to look into if they apply to you. All right. So we've covered now the top 10 plus the bonus plus the 3 extras. The first 5 were all about Visual Studio, this visualstudio.com page. We're talking the IDEs for Windows and Mac. We're talking the code for all versions of desktop software. We have Visual Studio Team Services, which everyone should use for their code, and App Center, which is for mobile app developers. Then we shifted over into SQL Server and got into both Developer Edition and Express Edition, and the differences there and when we should use each. Azure, which we should definitely check out and see all the power that is there. Great opportunities there. And then also the docs.microsoft.com, which will help you out when you get stuck somewhere. Check this out first. And finally, the Microsoft Virtual Academy for all of your video training needs that I don't provide. If I provide them, I recommend me first, just because I think I'm more biased toward myself. So you can be biased either way. I'm fine. Also, the bonus of OneDrive, so check that out and see which plan works for you, but definitely start with the free version and make sure you like it. But there's a lot of stuff there that you can use. And then, of course, those 3 bonuses if you're a student, if you are a small business, or if you're an MVP. So I hope this has been helpful. This is just the top 10. There's other stuff that Microsoft provides. They're kind of, hidden away in little nooks and crannies, but these are definitely ones that, as a software developer, these are the kind of the top ones that you should know about and make sure you take advantage of. So if you have any suggestions for other ones that you want to point out to other people, definitely leave them in the comments below. I'll try and highlight them, especially if it's something I think people should know about. And I might even put it in the description if it's something valuable everyone should see. And also let me know what you think, and I'd appreciate a thumbs up on the video as well. All right, so that's it for this video. As always, I am Tim Corey.